Marcus is a very important person to me. Not and yes, he's a legend and he's helped pioneer the industry. But my personal connection to him was one day when I was running a dispensary. We did a rebrand and did a basically a relaunch of our dispensary. So I just called up all of our vendors and said, "Hey, you know what? Like, we'd love to have you participate. Is there anything you can do?" And he himself showed up with all his supplies, items. He gifted a bunch of samples and was right then and there from the start to the end. And so his dedication to being on the ground, assisting, small players like myself that was new to the industry. It was just his generosity of sharing his knowledge and his clout. I gotta say, he is one of the most beautiful people I've ever met. I spent a number of lunches and afternoons with him, and every single time I just can't get enough. So we have a very humble servant of Jah, and this is Marcus Richardson. Please give it up.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll probably sit down here for a little bit. We'll see what happens. Oh, I begged her, don't call me a legend. I'm just the humble servant of Jah. I'm the legend of nothing. And if you don't believe it, I'll give you my wife's phone number and she'll confirm everything that I'm suggesting right now. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. This is awesome. Thanks, Julie and Cannareps. Since day one that I met Julie, I loved what she was doing. I love the idea of sensory science. It's very important. We're learning. We're at a more basic level right now in the cannabis industry, unfortunately, than say from the hops industry. But we're catching up and we're starting to learn more about these different volatile organic compounds. And I think events like this, where we actually pay attention to the sommelier aspect and trust our olfactory. Two things I would suggest when you are doing sensory evaluations of cannabis is learn what your sensitivities are. So if you have like a sensitivity to D-limonene or a sensitivity to whatever sort of compound, could even be THC, it's important to take that into account in the way that you evaluate the sensory aspects of cannabis. The second one would be to, if you have, and if you recognize them, a lot of people don't, but if you have blind spots, if you have compounds that you can't perceive. And so understanding what your sensitivities are and the compounds that you can't perceive, someone might say, oh, this smells like this to me. And then the person next to them is like, wow, I don't get that at all. It's like, yeah, well, if they're missing a single thiol that they are unable to perceive, the compounds would smell very, very differently to them than it would be to you. So those are good things. But hats off to Julie and Cannareps for putting on events like this and supporting the frontliners, the bud tenders. You guys are the frontliners of our industry, so we definitely have mad respect for what you guys are doing. And I guess I'll start by just telling everyone a little bit about myself. I go by Marcus Richardson, aka the Bubbleman. Came from Manitoba originally at a very young age. I think I was 17 or 18. I decided to become an activist in the cannabis world. We were in the Bible Belt in Manitoba, so we were like, maybe we'll do like hemp activism. Yeah, we'll do hemp activism, because going to prison with hardcore criminals was not my idea of a good time. And the prison that we had outside of Winnipeg was very heavy, Stony Mountain Penitentiary. You did not want to be going into jail there as a habitual florist. So I avoided that. We did our hemp activism. We got the first hemp field growing in Manitoba in over 73 years. That was in 1995. And my partners went on to start the company Manitoba Harvest with the work that we did there. So you may have purchased those products at the grocery stores or whatnot. I basically left in 96 from Manitoba, came to British Columbia, hooked up with Hillary Black, a dear friend of mine, who was just kind of deciding in her life, should I go live in California with this guy that I've fallen in love with, or should I come to Canada, back to Canada, and start the BC Compassion Club? And I watched the BC Compassion Club, get, kind of created on my living room floor back in '97 while I was living in BC. And Hillary was really one of the only people I knew. We had known her from Hemp BC, from Mark Emery's place, and so I immediately became a sort of grower and philanthropist to the BC Compassion Club because I loved the idea of supporting the most vulnerable people in our society, people that are not only mentally ill and terminally ill, but also homeless, which is a pretty hardcore trio to be rocking. Some amazing people that I met back in those days, and we should all really thank all of them for their pioneering work, because the whole reason we can have an event like this today is based on a lot of the civil disobedience that Hillary was practicing at the BC Compassion Club, and that's how medical got into Canada, and Canada, of course, medical opened the door for federal legalization. So shout out to Hillary Black and all the good folks at the BC Compassion Club. I was helping them out a little bit too much, and at one point, someone was trying to steal all the cannabis out of their safe, trying to steal the safe, actually. They drove a car right through the front window of Commercial Drive store back in 99 or whenever it was, 98. And so she asked me, can you take this cannabis home? I'm worried it's going to get stolen. And it was like, I don't know, 16 and a half pounds. And there was a bit of cash that I just took it home. And that night I went through a roadblock at the Lionsgate Bridge and got busted with 16 and a half pounds and $6,000 cash. So that was fun. That really changed the sort of course of what I was doing and how I was sort of helping cannabis and the civil disobedience I was practicing. And that led me to realize I wasn't just going to be able to broker and sell cannabis at the rate that I was doing, which was at a fairly high rate in 97, 98. And so I needed to come up with something where I could, I mean, honestly, I'll be honest, it was my lawyer, John Conroy, who inspired this a great deal, because I would give him money, like cash in a paper bag, and that was proceeds of crime if the police caught me with it. But then he'd take the paper bag to the bank, and it was like, it was just legal money all of a sudden. Like he was like literally taking money from all these people in the cannabis industry, putting it in the bank, paying taxes on it, and it was legal. And I thought, I need to figure out how to do that. So I started a company called Fresh Headies, and I started popularizing these sets of bags that I coined bubble bags, which are the water extraction bags that we'll talk a little bit about today here, that basically using water and ice, you can isolate the glandular trichome heads of cannabis and in a very pure form. And we're going to go through some macro photographs and talk about that in a little bit here as well. So this company was right at the onset of digital cameras. You know, to give you an idea, the Sony CyberShot in 1999 was a 2.2 megapixel camera. 2 megapixel camera. That was one of the first digital cameras that you could take pictures of something that was at your home and then upload it onto the internet. This was also during a time where cannabis.com, cannabisculture.com, overgrow.com, cannabisworld.com, all of these sites were popping up, and people who were in the cannabis community, growers and dealers and hash makers and breeders and all of these different people, were suddenly like brave enough, and they were living all over where you could get in serious trouble for this level of civil disobedience that they were practicing. And now we were on a website and we could all communicate with one another. And it was the most incredible thing. And the timing of that thing, the timing of me getting busted, which I thought was the worst thing at the time. And I learned that it was probably my own manifestation coming to me, as they often do, which is as an obstacle. And then you have to get over your own ego and see past the obstacle and turn it into an opportunity. I could have played the victim. I could have, woe is me. I lost the weed. I lost the cash. I'm busted. I'm a heat score. I can't sell weed anymore. But instead, I decided, maybe I'll pioneer something new, like water extraction, not just in Canada, but all over the world through these websites. And I'll start teaching people how to make this incredible quality hash at in their own homes, which was, you know, the opposite of sort of the other concentration that was popular in 99. 2 months after I released my bags, Indra released the BHO method on neuroid.org. And that was, you know, his karma was very different from my karma. And I know Indra very well. He basically put this method out there as a scientist, but not understanding that young people would get a hold of it, and then they started blowing up. burning their houses down, blowing their hands off, and doing this whole variety of things that is very, very dangerous. So it was a unique place to be in 99 as the water extraction guy versus all of these BHO communities, which I will say now, the majority of the people I know from the BHO community back in the day, they all smoke live hash rosin. So we're going to talk about solventless extractions, the 3 different practices that I personally use, my solventless quiver. But I figured I'd take you through some photographs because for me, before I could learn about terpenes and terpenoids and thiols and esters and esterification of terpenes and cannabinoids and trichomes and capitate stocks and all of these different sort of terminologies, I first had to see what they were, and I wasn't seeing enough with my naked eye. So around 2007, 2008, I started practicing macro photography, and I started photographing cannabis with a macro lens and bringing it to my eyes, bringing that world into my brain in a way that I could make more sense of it and have a deeper understanding of what it was, what it is that is going on at these levels. So I just want to kind of quickly walk you through some of these photos, and then we'll talk a little bit about dry sifting rosin and bubble hash. So let me see. Okay, we're going the other way. So this is just a picture of seeds, just a picture of seed. It all starts with a seed. Julie asked me earlier, oh, could you speak to what makes a great quality? How do you make a great quality as a hash maker? Hash makers don't make great quality. And I know that might sound confusing to you, but what hash makers do, and concentration extract artists, whatever you want to call them, they unveil what the genetics, the genes, and the grower, along with the terroir and the methodologies of growing, all of those variables, that's where quality is created. The hash maker does not create quality. He or she unveils quality if it's there. And we do that through what we practice, which is purification. We create purity. You want it to be as pure as possible, and you'll see in some of these pictures, some of the hash that I've made is just that, extremely pure. This was a photograph of Sleestack crossed with skunk number 1 from DNA Genetics, and it was, I don't know, 2009 or 2010 in Amsterdam, and Aaron from the D, or the A from DNA, Don and Aaron, of course, is the name of those 2 guys, DNA. He asked me to take a photo for the inside of one of their hats. So when you took the hat off, you would get this picture of seeds. And it all starts with a seed, so I figured let's start this with a seed. Next up, this is a macro photograph of a hash plant seed that was 25 years old at the time of cracking. I did not keep it in a freezer. It was in a refrigerator for about the last 10 years, but at room temperature for quite a while. And I thought it would be a neat thing to document. And it's also the striations, the harshness of the crack in the seed. You can really see how sharp it is. And I learned something when I took these pictures, because what I did not know, this is also a 25-year-old plant from Jamaica that I collected in 1995. And it's, I wouldn't call it a cultivar, because lamb's bread isn't, and it's lamb's bread, not breath. It's the bread of the lamb. That's what the cultivar is called. Lots of people mix that up and call it lamb's breath, but it's actually lamb's bread. And this was, lamb's bread would be in Jamaica kind of like someone saying sativa. It would be more like for a genre of plants than an actual cultivar. There is no one single lamb's bread plant, but there are narrow-leaf drug cultivars that are considered to be lamb's bread, around Jamaica. Less so now, unfortunately, but this one I collected in '95, and it was spectacular. Just a cool up-close shot, and you see how sharp the husk of the seed is, and how delicate and slug-like the root of the cannabis plant is. So these are extremely opposing worlds, so close together, and that veil of like a half a centimeter, a quarter of a centimeter is life or death. Because if the seed touches that sharp edge and grows out and opens itself up, it will be dead. So it's a very delicate process. Shout out to the breeders that are creating good genetics. And there's a whole process on how this happens without your seeds dying. And this is a big part of that process. So this is called a bitument. And this bitumen is like the sac that the embryo grows in inside the calyx. When the male pollen hits the stigma, the pistillate hair, it travels one single piece of pollen, just like one sperm, one egg, travels down into the calyx, and it creates one single seed. This brown pad in the middle is actually what's sitting at the bottom of the calyx, and then that material is this membrane that wraps around the embryo, and it allows the embryo to birth out of the seed husk without damage. So this is a very, very important part of seed breeding. And if you're growing seeds that produce a membrane that is too thin, you'll have less success rate in your germination. So this is, I don't know, I find it interesting. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Just a couple more pictures of this bitumen, because I thought it was so neat. Anyone that's grown enough seeds has seen the bitumen get trapped on the cotyledon. These are the first two leaves on the plant, and as any grower knows, they're called the cotyledon. They're not true leaves in the sense that they're not serrated. They're just round little leaves, and they're called the cotyledon. When the bitumen gets trapped on the cotyledon the way this is, if you don't help it and remove it, it'll only take a couple of days before the interior, the epicotyl, which is the part that we're going to see next, the true cannabis leaves that are trying to come out in the V, the bottom of this photo, they suffocate and they die, and then that is also a poor germination rate. This is just kind of cool. I thought it looked like a walnut husk. It's just the seed husk that the cannabis plant and the bitumen has expelled after rooting and growing. And another photo of the same thing with the cotyledon and that bitumen all in one place. They all used to be residing right inside this little husk. I just think that's so cool, personally. And yeah, this right where this little piece of light is where we're going to see the epicotyl produce. And this will also be interesting for people. So you see these little arms. You can see right away the epicotyl looks like wet tissue paper, and it is pretty much that delicate. And so it grows these types of non-glandular trichomes. So these are trichomes that have a different purpose than producing aromatic volatiles and cannabinoids. Instead, they produce these little arms that allow the epicotyl to pull itself off of the cotyledon without getting stuck. And anyone that's grown has seen, once again, if you don't produce genetics that produce strong enough trichomes in this particular place on that epicotyl coming out of the cotyledon, you can run into problems. And all of these things, you can see how deep this rabbit hole goes, right? Literally with your eyes, you can see it. It's really quite something to start understanding, like what in the genetics creates a strong success rate of germination. And then that's not even to get into account what gene synthases are present and turned on, meaning, a plant that has a gene synthase of CBDA, if it's in the off position, that plant will not produce CBDA. You can take that plant as breeding stock and produce CBDA in the offspring because the synthase is there, but you need to breed it in to be turned on. So all of the volatile organic compounds, those are gene synthases that are turned on to produce these very unique profiles that Julie definitely loves, because I heard her talking about it. I think it's so awesome how much she geeks out on cannabis and absolutely just truly loves cannabis. And it's one of the unique things about our community. It's really something that a lot of us absolutely love. You can see a little damage on the cotyledon here. That's probably from where that membrane was left on a little bit too long. And you can see it just starts eating into the plant. And that plant would have been dead in a very, very near future. That's a 25-year-old seed. So I don't know how many of you grow, but maybe, I don't even know how many of you are over 25 years old. But when you have a seed that's over 25 years old or around that, you want to give it the best care possible. You can see here the epicotyl is absolutely covered in trichomes now. The top of it is very white. That's where the two leaves meet. They're going to separate here very soon. This is just a cool picture of a pistillate hair. I thought it was like buddies, they're just holding hands on the plant. This is where the seeds, you can see these are other types of trichomes that are growing on the outside of this pistillate hair. Each pistillate hair comes out of a calyx. Sometimes you'll get two coming out of a calyx. And that's how the plant gets pollinated. Pollen hits one of those trichomes. It gets sucked into the interior of the pistillate and travels down below and produces a seedling to pass on that genetics. This would be the mycorrhizosphere of the root system. So just a kind of very hard picture to take, but this is the root tap, and these little mycorrhizosphere hairs are the things that will help the plant sequester the compounds that it needs in order to express itself in the way that you want it to, which is ideally strong terpene and volatile organic compound expression, and obviously a nice strong cannabinoid profile as well. So this is a picture of the epicotyle. It's now growing a little bigger, and I wanted to show this because a lot of people that tell me they grow say, oh, we don't spray once it blooms. Once the trichomes are in development, we don't spray anymore. And I show them this picture and say, these are glandular trichomes on the first set of leaves of a seedling. So yeah, ideally, particularly if it's some sort of systemic poison, don't spray those on your plants. We're volatilizing this stuff into our lungs, and it's probably best. This is also a picture of the epicotyle showing clearly bulbous trichome heads all over the outside of it, as well as, once again, another type of non-glandular trichome, which is called the cystolith hair. So there's, in general, about 6 of these different types of trichomes. I've shown you quite a few of them on the epicotyle, on the pistillate hair, and also the cystolith hairs here on the epicotyle. So those are 3 types of non-glandulars. Then we're going to talk about the 3 types of glandular trichomes, which, here's a couple of them right here. This is, oh, I don't know what I did there. I don't know what I'm doing here. Sorry. I think she has this set up a little different than I normally do. Bear with me. I think we're back. Yes. Okay. So this is a picture I took of a good friend of mine's cannabis. It was the Burmese, fucking incredible. And this was Opus from Cannabis Culture Days. I liked it because it had a refraction of a cannabis leaf in the trichome head. So these taller trichomes are called capitate stalk. And these little shorter ones aren't actually capitate stalks at a different level of maturity, but they're a totally different type of trichome called capitate sessile. The first ones we saw that were just the little balls stuck on the leaf, those ones are called bulbous. And from an inhalation standpoint, you want a cultivar that has capitate stalks and capitate sessiles, especially from an extraction standpoint, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So keep in mind, all of the medicinal compounds, some of you may want to argue this in your mind, but science disagrees with you. All of the volatile compounds, all of the cannabinoids are found inside the glandular trichome of this head. These capitate stalks are made of cellulose, so like the same thing a cardboard box is made of, which is also what the majority of the plant is made out of, cellulose and fiber. So really what you learn about cannabis, that the same way when it produces, if you want to produce wonderful clothes from hemp, you don't take the seeds, you don't take the resin, you don't take the buds, you take the cellulose and the fiber from the plant. So you take the one from the whole. If you want to access the essential amino acid rich seed oil in the embryo, you don't squish the cellulose, you don't squish the fiber or the bud. You take the seed and squish that, or remove the embryo, and that's where all of the essential amino acids are produced in the plant. So it's not like this is my opinion, it's just the way the plant is. If you want to access the cellulose for making paper, you don't use the seed, you don't use the bud. So when it comes to accessing the medicinal components, whether it's for recreational perspective or medical perspective, it's all happening in this resin gland. And I have people all the time tell me, I don't like hash, I just smoke the flower. And I just say, well, that's okay, you're still smoking the hash. You just prefer it diluted on biomass so that you're getting less amounts of it. And it's different. Like when you smoke cannabis, it's totally different from when you smoke hash. There's no doubt about that. But if I take the resin off the cannabis and I do it really well, and you smoke it, you won't want to smoke any more of it. Like factual. You just, the resin needs to be present on the flower to create the high that you're getting there. So glandular trichomes, 3 different kinds. This is a Astro Boy photo. I grew this plant and I photographed it. This is a really good example of the capitate stalk, how tall it is. and then the capitate sessles next to it. When you're producing hash producing cultivars for the hash market, there's plants that have 40% bulbous heads. So 40% of all the trichomes on the plant are bulbous. And you have to understand that they don't extract in solventless processing. They don't extract with mechanical screen separations. They don't wash off the plant. Washing and dry sifting require this long cap, this long stalk with a little head on top where it's easy to break it off and it snaps off. And then you use a variety of ways to isolate those, which we're going to talk about for a few minutes after I get through these photos. Another fan leaf, this is always a good sign. You want to grow genetics that produce large amounts of cannabinoids. I'm not as much worried about high THC, but I do like a very dense amount of trichomes, and I want 90 to 95% of the trichomes that are on the plants that I wash to be capitate stalked and capitate sessile. I want 5% or less to be bulbous. And if you isolated these glands into capitate stalks, capitate sessile, and bulbous, you hit the bulbous ones, you'd realize they're waxy, they're thick, they contain a very unique oil compound that often lights on fire if you have a flame near it. It's very much like the 45 micron bubble hash, but very hard to extract. And it's the difference between solvent and solventless. When you have a solvent guy say, I ran that material and I got 24%. And you have a solventless guy say, wow, I ran that material and I got 14%. These are dry weights, not fresh frozen. Where does that difference come from? That difference comes from the fact that he's using a solvent, or she, to isolate or to extract and melt all trichomes present. So all the bulbous heads are going in there. And if it's 40%, you're going to literally get a 40% yield higher than your solventless counterpart. This is also important for LPs and hash makers to understand these things so that they're not making hash from the wrong genetics. If your whole process is to make dry sift and you're using cultivars that are bulbous rich in the glandular trichome area, you're missing the boat. You need to kind of go back and be like, okay, we need to have specific cultivars for specific processes. Otherwise, in these tough margins that we're in, it becomes a very difficult. This is a UBC Rockstar from Remo, the urban grower. I thought it was a good plant to show the anthocyanin striations in the capitate stalk, these little purple colorets. They often come in through stress, cold, different things that happen to the plant in the fall. It's why a lot of plants produce anthocyanin. It's an antioxidant. It's found in blueberry skin. It's found in all sorts of different flowers. And it's healthy to take orally, not so much to smoke it. It is water soluble, so your water, when you wash anthocyanin-rich products, the water will be very purple. It doesn't very often translate into the resin itself. It can with rosin, but it's less likely with bubble. I've seen it, but it's far and few between. Just a little bumblebee that landed on a plant when Johnny B and I were on my deck one day filming a Puff Wednesday, and this little guy came and landed on. It was one of Johnny B's buds, actually. Shows you the difference between the size of an insect, and you can see in the corner here, these are the glandular trichome heads. I thought it was kind of a neat photo, just to horrify anyone that wanted to see what an insect looked up close, but also to show the difference between a tiny little insect, yet it's still like 50 to 100 times bigger than those trichomes. Some trichomes that were really showing, you can see these little circles are different types of organelles. And so you have plastids and you have vacuoles, and plastids produce phenols and vacuoles produce hydrocarbons, and those hydrocarbons are terpenes. And so these are the little labs that cannabinoids become cooked into existence. It's the reason why I prefer hash over oil, whether it's rosin or full melt bubble. I find full melt bubble to be much more of like a 5-course meal, because the laboratory that cooked all of these compounds into existence is present. It's in the resin gland, so you're not filtering it out with heat and pressure. That being said, I certainly wouldn't kick rosin out of bed for eating crackers. That's something weird my dad would have said back in the day about something else, but I said it. I thought this was cool too. A couple trichomes pounding each other out. Respect Mon, some Jamaican trichomes right there. I don't remember what the cultivar was, but it was from my buddy Archie in Kingston, growing great weed. It would have been something gassy and cushy for sure, because that's what those guys loved. This is 5 minutes, perfect. This is a picture of material that I washed. This, I will talk about bubble hash real quickly for those of you that know or don't know. This is a way to purify glandular trichome heads into a very pure form, isolating them using water and ice, breaking the heads off. They sink. They're very brittle in the cold ice water. In the mixture, they break and they're still affected by gravity, so they sink in the water while everything else floats. You end up with a very clean product. You can see these are all capitate stalks and sessles with no heads on them. So I clean that plant very effectively. And then you can also see when you clean the plant effectively, this is what your hash should look like. And this is what I meant by purity. This grower, this breeder produced an incredible genetic, produced an incredible expression of that genetic, grew to perfection. All I really did was isolate the resin glands and purify them. So did I make it? Did I make the quality? No, I created the purity, which unveiled the quality. Unveiling the flame. This is some of my mentor, Skunkman Sam's full melt dry sift, been sifted to perfection. This is a much harder thing to do when you don't have water on your side and everything is falling through. Hopefully I'll get to speak on the difference between dry sifted. These are dry sifted, but they're very clean. Sorry, keep doing that, but we'll go back down here real quick. We're almost done. I took a lot of photos. Holy shit. So these are all dry sifts. We can kind of whip through them. And then there's some rosin and some dry sift pressed. This is some bubble hash that's very fresh. But what I wanted to get to, these are air dried products from Barcelona. Really nice orange soils and heat that volatilizes the product while it's drying. So we're not using freeze dryers in this instance. It congeals together. And it's very different. These are all air dried bubbles from back in the day. Producing different colors. This shows the purity of the bubble. We call this 6-star full melt bubble. It melts into a liquid, and it is really the holy grail of the hash world. I don't think it'll be sold at dispensaries for a while. I don't think it'll be something you see your customers coming in and asking for quite as much as pre-rolled joints and other hashes, but we'll get there as we do it together. More rosin. What I wanted to show was what dry sift looks like under the microscope. So you saw the bubble hash, you saw the purity of the bubble hash. This is really important from a bud tender standpoint. When someone comes in and they say, I want the best bang for my buck, I want to buy a gram of hash, and there's a $40 gram of bubble, but there's a $20 or a $15 gram of dry sift. You have to understand the $15 to $20 gram, let's say it's $20, which is half the price of the bubble at 40. The purity of this is 10%. And if you understand what that means, it means 10% of this product is glandular trichome heads and active. 90% of it is not. Which means to get 1 gram of glandular trichome heads, you would have to buy 10 grams of this product at $15 to $20 a gram. So now you're $200 into your gram of heads versus the $40 gram that you could have got of bubble. So this isn't a story that the COA is telling. Oh, well, this one's 60% THC and this one's 30. So $40, $20. It makes sense. It's half the price. It's half the THC. That's just confusing people. The reality is you want to understand when you're purchasing hash, what is the purity of the hash of glandular trichomes? What is the percentage of trichome heads that are in that hash? Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you need sift like this. I like it to be at least 20 to 25% heads. But when we make our hazel joints, which are the pure hash joints that have no paper and no glue, it can't be too high of a purity. If it's that full melt bubble and you go to light the joint and it starts dripping and melting and it won't burn consistently, then that product is not going to be effective. So there are times where you want hash to be of this particular caliber, but in my opinion, it's for novel products where you, and the fact is also, it's a much more mellow smoke. And a lot of people that smoke hash, I'm sure you guys would agree with this. Not most people are not carrying around rigs and smoking $100 grams of live hash rosin. That is a small percentage of the customers that are coming into dispensaries. They want pre-rolled joints, they want gummies and different drinks, and of course, herb, eighths and ounces and whatnot. But hash is still very much niche. So it's all about kind of educating. It's a fun little rabbit hole to go down. I have a bunch of different social media you can check out. My YouTube channel is called BC Bubbleman's World. And there's a show called Hash Church. I would implore all of you, if you really want to learn about cannabis and get yourself some PhDs, go and watch that show. There's a couple hundred episodes. It's me basically moderating a panel of 6 to 15 absolutely inspirational, incredible, high caliber people who have lived the experience that they're sharing, patient stories, breeders, growers, people that have opened stores, bud tent, like everyone from every aspect, doctors and PhD chemists, the whole 9 yards. We're all getting together, sharing about a plant that we love. And I do hope in the future to meet some of the most gung-ho, passionate, obsessed bud tenders, because I'd love to do a hash church with some of you guys on. I like the idea of the information that you have being shared to a wider audience, because you guys are the front lines. You're talking to people every day. And yeah, I take this shit pretty seriously. It's my life's passion. It's my life's work. I've never really done anything else other than cannabis. So I'll finish off by thanking each and one of you for being a part of the industry and being a part of the community. More important, we have our own culture. We don't need it to be recreated. And keep doing what you're doing. Sell tons of weed. Can you believe you get to sell weed? That is fucking awesome. Thanks, everybody.